I almost took an innocent life, and I still see his face. I don't tell this story often, I don't like to, but every time I close my eyes, I see his face, his wide, terrified eyes, the way his hands trembled, the way my finger hovered over the trigger, inches away from a decision that would have ended his life and ruined mine. I don't know his name, I never will, but I came within a heartbeat of killing an innocent man. It was a hot summer night, the kind where the air is thick and tempers run short. I was patrolling a neighborhood that had been hit hard with break-ins. Armed home invasions had been getting bolder, more frequent. We were told to stay sharp, stay aggressive. Tiff, if they make a move, you make yours first, my sergeant had said earlier that week. I nodded along with the rest of the guys. It was how we had to think to stay alive. The call came in just after midnight. A woman had reported a possible burglary in progress at her neighbor's house. She claimed she saw a shadow moving near the back door, heard something metal hit the ground. She wasn't sure, but she thought the man had a gun. I was 2 blocks away. I hit the sirens and sped toward the address, heart pounding. I could already feel the adrenaline creeping in, sharpening my senses, making me hyper-aware of every sound, every shadow. I cut the sirens before pulling up. The house was dark, except for a faint glow inside. I stepped out, gun drawn, moving quickly and quietly toward the backyard. My partner, Rodriguez, was right behind me, whispering that he'd take the left. I nodded. We moved like we'd done this 100 times before. And then I saw him. A figure stood by the back door, partially hidden in the shadows. He was tall, wearing dark clothes, a hoodie pulled up over his head. I couldn't see his face. His right hand moved to his waist, and I saw something glint in the dim porch light. Holy shit, it's a fucking in. Those words exploded in my mind. My hands moved before my brain could catch up. I raised my weapon, finger curling around the trigger. Police. Show me your hands, I shouted, voice steady but forceful. He turned fast, too fast. His hands came up, and in that split second, I knew I was going to have to fire. I saw fear flash across his face, then confusion, then horror. And I saw what was in his hand. A fucking phone. My heart stopped. I had been a fraction of a second away from pulling the trigger. I could already feel the kick of the recoil that never came. The man, barely more than a kid, maybe early 20s, threw his hands in the air, dropping the phone. He stumbled backward, hitting the side of the house, gasping for breath. His whole body shook. Don't shoot, don't shoot. Rodriguez was shouting something behind me, but I couldn't hear it over the pounding in my ears. My gun felt heavy. My arms were locked. I forced myself to lower it. Slowly, my hands suddenly unsteady. The guy kept his hands up, eyes locked on mine, too afraid to move. It turned out he lived there. His name was Marcus. He had just gotten home from his shift at a restaurant and forgotten his keys. His mother, the one who had called the police, was asleep upstairs. She had seen him moving in the shadows and assumed the worst. And because of that, because of one wrong assumption, because of how fast things happen in the dark, because my training drilled into me that hesitation equals death, had almost killed him. I tried to explain myself, to apologize, but what the hell could I say? That I thought he was a threat, that I reacted on instinct, that if he had moved even slightly differently, I might have blown his chest open on his own doorstep. He didn't say much. Just kept staring at me, breathing hard, blinking away the tears in his eyes. His hands were still shaking when I walked away. I filed my report. I left out how close I had been to pulling the trigger. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I did. That night, I sat in my car long after my shift ended, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My whole body was buzzing with leftover adrenaline, but it wasn't the usual post-shootout rush. It was something different. Something worse. I had been so damn sure. I was trained for moments like that, conditioned to act fast. And still, I had almost made the worst mistake of my life. People always say, it's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. They say, cops have to make split-second decisions. And they're right. But what if the decision is wrong? What if the fear, the training, the expectation of violence makes you see a gun where there isn't one? I don't think I slept for 3 days after that. It's been years, but I still see his face. I still think about how easy it would have been to pull that trigger, and I think about how different my life and his would be if I had. Some nights, I close my eyes and I'm right back there, staring at that dark shape in the shadows, feeling the weight of my gun in my hands. I tell myself that I did everything right. I tell myself that hesitation gets cops killed, that I reacted the way I was trained. But I also know that if I had been just a little more scared, a little more on edge, if my finger had twitched even slightly, Marcus would be dead. A young man, an innocent man, would have been another headline, another statistic, another name shouted at protests. And I would have had to live with that for the rest of my life. I don't know what to do with that. I wear the badge. I do my job. I try to be the kind of cop who doesn't make the wrong call. But I know how close I came. And I know how easy it is for things to go wrong. Maybe that's why I still see his face. Maybe that's why I always will.